cursed village of Kuldhara, a forgotten town and its dark secret. In the heart of Rajasthan, India, lies a village that has been abandoned for over 200 years. Kuldhara, once a prosperous settlement, now stands as a crumbling ruin, swallowed by the sands of time. But it's not just another deserted town. Kuldhara carries a sinister legend. Locals whisper of a powerful curse, eerie shadows that move at night, and an ancient force that refuses to let anyone stay for long. This is a true paranormal mystery, one that has baffled historians, ghost hunters, and skeptics alike. And for those who dare to step into the ruins after dark, something watches from the shadows. The vanishing of the Paliwal Brahmins. Kuldhara was once home to the Paliwal Brahmins, a thriving community of scholars and traders. The village, along with 84 surrounding settlements, was known for its prosperity and wisdom. The people lived peacefully, worshipping their gods, tending to their fields, and conducting trade. But everything changed when Salim Singh, the corrupt minister of the ruling kingdom, set his sights on the village chief's daughter. Salim Singh, infamous for his cruelty, had a reputation for extorting high taxes and punishing those who defied him. When he laid eyes on the young, beautiful daughter of the Kuldhara leader, he demanded her hand in marriage. If the village refused, he threatened to destroy them all. The Paliwals faced an impossible choice: surrender the girl to a tyrant or suffer his wrath. But instead of submitting, the villagers did something no one expected. In one single night, the entire population of Kuldhara, men, women, children, vanished. They abandoned their homes, leaving behind food on their plates and fires still burning. Not a single soul was ever found, and no one knows where they went. But before they left, they cursed the land, vowing that no one would ever be able to live there again. A place where no one stays. For centuries, Kuldhara remained untouched. Those who attempted to settle there found themselves tormented by an unseen force. Farmers reported hearing whispers in the wind. Travelers saw shadowy figures moving through the ruins. Some even claimed to have felt invisible hands pushing them out of the village. The government eventually declared Kuldhara a protected heritage site, but that hasn't stopped the stories. Paranormal researchers, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers have visited the ruins, and many never return the same. Then, in 2010, a group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night inside the village. They wanted to prove once and for all whether the curse was real. They were not prepared for what they found. The first signs of the haunting. As the sun set over the barren village, the investigators set up their cameras and recording equipment. The ruins were eerily silent, with only the sound of the wind whistling through broken walls. For the first few hours, nothing unusual happened. But as midnight approached, things began to change. Sudden drops in temperature. Their thermometers showed an instant drop from 35 dU4C to nearly 10 dU4C. Footsteps in the sand, even though no one was moving. Unseen whispers, recorded on their devices but unheard by the human ear. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the group heard something terrifying. A low, guttural growl echoed through the village, growing louder and closer. It was not human. One of the team members, Arjun, turned towards the source of the sound and screamed. Standing between the ruins was a tall, shadowy figure, its eyes glowing an unnatural shade of amber. The moment their flashlight landed on it, it disappeared. Panic set in. The team tried to pack up their equipment and leave, but then they noticed something even worse. Their footprints in the sand were disappearing behind them, as if something was erasing their presence from the village. And then they saw it, a single set of footprints appearing out of nowhere, walking straight toward them. A night of terror in the deserted ruins. The paranormal investigators stood frozen as the mysterious footprints approached. The dry, lifeless sand beneath them should have remained undisturbed, but something unseen was walking toward them, one step at a time. A chill ran through the group. Arjun, the cameraman, gripped his equipment so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Mira, the researcher, whispered a shaky prayer. The team leader, Vikram, tried to steady his breath. But inside, they all felt the same thing. They were not alone anymore. The vanishing footprints. As the footprints neared, Vikram made a split-second decision. Turn off the flashlights. The desert was instantly swallowed by darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon. casting eerie shadows over the crumbling ruins. The wind had died completely, leaving behind an unnatural silence. They stood there, waiting, listening, and then the footsteps stopped. No one dared to move. Vikram slowly reached for his infrared camera and pointed it toward the last place the footprints had been. His fingers trembled as he zoomed in. Through the lens, he saw it. A shadowy figure stood just a few feet away, its shape barely distinguishable from the darkness. It wasn't fully formed, as though it were flickering between this world and another. Its amber eyes burned through the night, fixed directly on Vikram. And then the most chilling thing happened. It smiled, the screams in the wind. A sudden gust of wind roared through the village, howling between the ruins like a living entity. The force of it knocked Arjun's camera from his hands, sending it crashing onto the ground. And then came the voices, a chorus of whispers. They weren't coming from one place. They were everywhere, all around them, as if the ruins themselves were speaking, words they couldn't understand. Voices layered on top of each other, men, women, children, some soft, some filled with rage. And then a scream. It came from the direction of the temple ruins, a blood-curdling wail of agony, as if someone was being torn apart. It was loud, too loud, impossible for any human to produce. Mira clutched Vikram's arm. "We have to go. Now." No one argued. The rush to escape. The team scrambled to grab their equipment. Vikram held onto the camera, still running, hoping to capture whatever was happening. But then the whispers changed. They turned into one voice, a deep, inhuman growl that spoke a single word. "Ruko. Stop." Vikram's entire body locked up. It felt like something was gripping his throat, making it impossible to breathe. His vision blurred. The air around him felt thick, as though the very atmosphere was resisting his movement. Mira grabbed his arm and yanked him forward, breaking whatever invisible force had taken hold of him. The team sprinted through the ruins, their feet kicking up clouds of dust. They could still hear the whispers, getting louder, angrier. They reached their jeep, breathless and shaking. Vikram jammed the key into the ignition. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. Panic set in. Arjun frantically checked his camera. The screen was full of static, the entire recording corrupted. And then they saw it. Standing at the entrance of the village was the same shadowy figure, its glowing amber eyes burning into them. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, dozens of shadowy figures began emerging from the ruins. Some stood still. Others crawled on all fours, their distorted limbs twisting unnaturally. They weren't attacking. They weren't chasing. They were watching, waiting. The whispers returned, now sounding like laughter. The escape. The Jeep engine roared to life. Without looking back, Vikram slammed the gas pedal. The tires kicked up dust as they sped away from Kuldhara, the ruins vanishing into the darkness behind them. No one spoke for the entire drive back. The oppressive weight that had hung over them inside the village had lifted, but something felt unfinished. When they finally reached the safety of their hotel, they checked their footage. Every clip was corrupted, except for one. The last image the camera had captured before it shut down was the shadowy figure staring at them. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. The curse follows them. The team sat in silence in their hotel room, staring at the flickering laptop screen. The corrupted footage had left them shaken, but one image had survived. The shadowy figure, its glowing amber eyes staring directly into the lens. But there was something wrong with the photo. Mira leaned in closer, her fingers trembling as she traced the outline of the shadowy figure. This wasn't how it looked when we saw it. Vikram swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's closer." And she was right. The figure in the image was standing much closer than they remembered. In fact, it wasn't even near the ruins anymore. It was at the edge of the village, as if it had been watching them leave. As if it was following them. A cold dread settled over the group. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet. The air conditioning hummed softly, but underneath it, Mira thought she could hear something else, a whisper, just at the edge of hearing. A whisper that wasn't coming from any of them. The first sign That night, the team agreed to sleep in the same hotel room. No one wanted to be alone. The unease of Kuldhara had followed them, and every instinct told them something wasn't right. Vikram lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with everything that had happened. The footprints, the whispers, the paralyzing voice that had commanded them to stop. And then, in the stillness of the night, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. His breath caught in his throat. The sound was faint but distinct, fingernails tapping against glass. Slowly, he turned his head toward the hotel room window. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. His heart pounded. He wanted to wake the others, but he felt frozen, just like in Kuldhara, when the invisible force had held him in place. Summoning every ounce of courage, Vikram forced himself to move. His hand shook as he reached for the curtain. Slowly, carefully, he pulled it back. There was nothing there. Only the dimly lit balcony, empty and silent. He exhaled in relief. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But just as he was about to turn away, a handprint appeared on the fogged-up glass. A large, dark handprint right where his face had been. The mark of the cursed. Vikram jolted awake to Mira shaking him. "Vikram, get up." He sat up, disoriented. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the window. His head throbbed, and his body felt unusually cold. "What happened?" he muttered. Mira pointed at his arm. "Look at yourself." Vikram's skin was covered in black bruises, finger-shaped bruises, as if something had grabbed him in his sleep. Panic spread through the group. They checked their bodies. Arjun had a single bruise on his leg. Mira had a scratch along her shoulder. None of them had any memory of being touched. "We need to leave," Arjun said, his voice shaky. "We need to leave this place right now." Vikram nodded. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The curse of Kuldhara had latched onto them, and it wasn't gonna let go. The journey back, and a warning. They packed their bags in record time and drove out of Jaisalmer, heading straight for Delhi. No one spoke much during the journey. Every now and then, Vikram glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something sitting in the back seat. The feeling of being watched never left them. When they finally reached Delhi, they contacted a local priest who had experience with paranormal disturbances. The moment he saw Vikram's bruises, his face darkened. "You should never have gone to that place," the priest muttered. "We just wanted to document it," Mira said. The priest sighed, shaking his head. Kuldhara was abandoned for a reason, and those who disturb its silence bring something back with them. Vikram swallowed. "Can we get rid of it?" The priest nodded. "You need to perform a cleansing ritual, but even then, some things never truly leave." A final omen. That night, after the ritual, the team finally began to feel normal again. The heavy feeling in the air lifted. Their bruises began to fade. They dared to believe that they were safe. But just as Vikram was about to go to bed, his phone vibrated. A notification. A message from an unknown number. He frowned and opened it. There was no text. Just a single image. His blood ran cold. It was a photo of their hotel window from the night before. And standing just outside the glass was the shadowy figure with glowing amber eyes. The haunting intensifies. Vikram's phone slipped from his hands. The image on his screen made his stomach churn. It was the hotel window from the night before, the same window where he had seen the handprint. But in this photo, standing just outside the glass, was the shadowy figure with glowing amber eyes. Vikram's mind raced. Who sent this? Was it a prank, a trick of the light, or was something still watching them? Mira and Arjun leaned over his shoulder, their faces turning pale. "This isn't possible," Mira whispered. Arjun snatched the phone. "There's no number, no sender ID. It's like it came from nowhere." Vikram couldn't breathe. The figure in the image wasn't just outside the window anymore. It was closer than before. And its twisted, unnatural smile had grown wider. The last recording. That night, the team decided to go through their remaining audio recordings. Every other form of footage, video, and photos had been corrupted beyond recovery. but the voice recorders had managed to capture something. Mira plugged in the first recorder and hit play. For the first few minutes, all they heard was the sound of wind blowing through the ruins. Occasionally, there was the team's own voices discussing their equipment and the strange temperature drops. And then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., something changed. The wind stopped, and a new sound emerged. A whisper. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the static, but as Mira adjusted the volume, it became clearer. It was a voice, speaking in an ancient dialect of Rajasthani, a deep guttural growl, and then a single word in Hindi, "Mat jao, do not go." Vikram's hands clenched into fists. His heart pounded against his ribs. The voice on the recording sounded eerily familiar. And then they heard it, the same chilling laugh they had heard inside Kuldhara. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the recording. It was coming from inside their room. The presence in the room, the temperature plummeted. The once faint whispering grew louder, overlapping, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. And then, the hotel room lights flickered. The laughter stopped, and everything went silent. Vikram, Mira, and Arjun sat frozen. No one moved, no one even breathed. And then, thud, a heavy sound came from the wardrobe. Something was inside. Arjun's hands trembled as he reached for a flashlight. The beam flickered as he pointed it at the old wooden wardrobe. The door was slightly ajar. Mira shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't." But Arjun didn't listen. He reached out and pulled the door open. The wardrobe was empty. But on the inside of the door, scratched into the wood, were words in an ancient script. Mira stepped forward, her face pale. "This is Devanagari." She traced the rough, jagged letters with her fingers, and then she read them aloud. "No one leaves." The room plunged into chaos. The wardrobe door slammed shut on its own. The lights flickered violently, and a powerful gust of wind blew through the room, even though the windows were closed. The voices returned. This time they were louder, angrier. And then, through the noise, came a familiar deep voice. "Tum wapas auj." You will return. The final warning. Something snapped. The room went dead silent. The lights stopped flickering. The wind ceased. And then 3 loud knocks on the hotel door. Knock, knock, knock. The team held their breath. Knock, knock, knock. No one moved. No one dared to answer. After a long, agonizing moment, Vikram slowly approached the door. His hand trembled as he reached for the peephole. His stomach turned ice cold. There was no one outside. But the moment he stepped back, a slip of paper slid under the door. Mira grabbed it with shaking hands and unfolded it. It was written in blood-red ink. "You cannot escape. The return to the Forbidden Land." Vikram, Mira, and Arjun sat motionless, staring at the slip of paper in Mira's trembling hands. "You cannot escape." The words, written in blood-red ink, burned into their minds. The room was dead silent, but the heavy weight in the air told them they were not alone. "We have to leave," Arjun muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right now." Vikram nodded, his pulse hammering in his ears, but deep down he knew the truth. They had already left Kuldhara, and yet it had followed them. The road back to Kuldhara. By morning, the team made a terrifying decision. They had to go back. The paranormal activity was only getting stronger. The shadowy figure, the voices, the bruises. It was clear that the curse had latched onto them, and the only way to break it was to return to where it started. As they drove back through the barren desert, an eerie quiet surrounded them. No birds, no wind, only the sound of their jeep's tires against the dirt road. "We shouldn't be doing this," Mira whispered. "What if it doesn't let us leave this time?" Vikram's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Then we find a way to end this." The sun began to set as the ruins of Kuldhara appeared on the horizon. The sight of the deserted village made their skin crawl. As soon as they stepped out of the jeep, the temperature dropped instantly. It was waiting for them. The whispering shadows. The village was silent, too silent. Every instinct screamed at them to run, but they had to finish what they started. Mira placed a small offering of rice and flowers at the entrance of the temple ruins, whispering an apology to the spirits. Arjun sprinkled holy water around them. And then Vikram stepped forward. He pulled out a small brass bell given to him by the priest in Delhi. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "We only want to break the curse." The air grew heavier. The shadows around them shifted. And then they heard it. A low, guttural growl. The same deep voice they had heard before, now whispering from every direction. "You should not have returned." The final confrontation. A powerful gust of wind exploded through the village, nearly knocking them off their feet. The sand swirled violently, forming dark figures in the air. Then, from the depths of the ruins it appeared. The shadowy figure with the burning amber eyes stepped forward, its twisted grin stretching wider than any humans should. The air vibrated with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew deafening. And then, for the first time, it spoke clearly. "Leave and never return." The wind howled, nearly drowning out the words. Mira clutched Vikram's arm. "It's giving us a choice." Vikram took a shaky breath. "Then let's make the right one." Without hesitation, he rang the brass bell. A sharp, piercing sound echoed through the ruins, cutting through the whispers. The shadowy figures screeched, their forms flickering like dying flames. The amber identity let out an inhuman scream, its shape twisting and convulsing. The sandstorm around them collapsed, and suddenly, everything went still. The figures were gone. The whispers had vanished. Only the cold wind remained, whispering one last warning through the ruins. Never come back. The escape. The team didn't waste a second. They rushed to their jeep, the heavy feeling in the air finally lifting. As they drove away, Vikram glanced in the rearview mirror. The ruins of Kuldhara stood silent in the fading twilight. No figures, no glowing eyes, just an abandoned village, lost in time. And then, at the very edge of the village, standing completely still, a single dark figure watched them leave. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the dunes, its smile widened.